listeners. This is Mubilu Musoke with the Democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective. As you may have noticed already, during the last two conversations, we deviated a little bit from federalism to the study of the personalities of the leaders of Uganda in particular. And we shall continue to do the same today, just in order that we understand why politicians behave the way they behave. That is, it is very important, because right now, with our weak or infantile institutions, it's very difficult to control the behavior of political leaders. And therefore, the best way to understand their behavior is to look in their character and personality. Last week, we tried to understand and explain the political premises on which Museveni's politics is based or founded. For example, we analyzed Museveni's social metamorphosis theory. We concluded, of course, that the theory is invalid and of no useful purpose whatsoever. Today, we look at the origin of Museveni's political arrogance, which is rooted in what I call the Hima-Tutsi culture. We may trace Museveni's political arrogance to two intimately related sources. These are Museveni's personality or character and the Hima-Tutsi culture. We want to emphasize the fact that the two sources are intimately related because one shapes and or influences the content and the development of the other. Cultures tend to get infused into the character and personality of their members. Before we look at the details of the contradictions in Museveni's political life, or try to explain them, let us look at what we have characterized as Hima-Tutsi cultural arrogance, which, in my opinion, is the main source of the political behavior of some of the leaders we have in East Africa. The concept of Hima-Tutsi arrogance comes from the behavior of the Bahima and the Tutsi in their respective societies. Historically, both societies had almost identical kingdoms dominated by a ruthless minority which dominated the majority population for centuries. In fact, one can say that in order for the minority to dominate the majority for centuries, state terrorism had to be practiced to some extent. How can we explain the subservience of the majority to a small minority for so long? There was also inevitably systematic discrimination by the politically powerful minority against the powerless majority, which prevented the two communities from fusing or assimilating into one integrated society. In Uganda, for example, where there was no discrimination and equality of all people was supported, a totally different demography developed, very different from what developed in Ankole, Rwanda, and Burundi. So history is important for us to understand political behavior today. Hima-Tutsi cultural arrogance found expression in the strict prohibition of intermarriage between the Bahima and Bairu in Ankole and the Tutsi and Hutu in Rwanda and Burundi. That discrimination explains why, after centuries of the two communities living together, the minority Bahima and the Tutsi maintained their distinctive physical features that are today clearly still recognizable and distinguishable from the majority population. A strict enforcement of social inequality between the two groups created the first apartheid societies in Africa long before the Dutch landed at the Cape of Good Hope. The concept of apartheid was reinforced by the rule that no Mwiru in Ankole or Hutu in Rwanda and Burundi could aspire to become king, let alone be close to the throne. Not only was intermarriage prohibited, but the majority community was treated as inferior and less intelligent compared to the superior minority. Indeed, even chieftains in both societies was restricted to the Bahima group in Ankole and the Tutsi in Rwanda and Burundi. You may notice that last week I reviewed a book written by Janet Museveni, My Life's Journey. Now, in that book, Janet Museveni tells us that her father was a Gomborora chief, and she was, of course, a Muhima. Colonialism, unfortunately, reinforced the same traditional rules, thereby aggravating the situation, leading to genocide after independence in Burundi and Rwanda. In Ankole, the fact that the state was not controlled by the Bahima apparently averted a similar tragedy from taking place. This explains the fact that in Ankole, Rwanda, and Burundi, the restoration of the kingdoms dominated by the minorities is an impossible dream. Hima-Tutsi arrogancy has made it impossible. Now you can understand the origin of Museveni's arrogance. It is deeply rooted in Hima-Tutsi culture of looking down on certain people who, according to Museveni, do not measure up to Hima-Tutsi superiority. Now you also understand why Museveni can arrogantly abuse rich Ugandans, read Baganda, producing stupid and lazy children. That is arrogance at its worst, or you may say the best. In fact, the Tutsi in Rwanda and Burundi and the Bahima in Ankole behaved in the the same way the Europeans behaved under colonialism. They treated black men as boys. Jomo Kenyatta, who was himself first called a boy in the 1920s, and later on in the 1950s, a terrorist by the white settlers in Kenya, fully understood how sour suffering without bitterness under colonialism tasted. Unlike the Bahima in Ankole and the Tutsi in Rwanda and Burundi, the Arabs who enslaved the Africans nevertheless did not create apartheid either in East Africa or in the Middle East. In fact, the slaves taken by Arabs from Eastern and Central African regions to the Middle East were fully integrated into the Arab society and culture, leaving behind no distinctive African social structure in the Arab countries. That is contrasted with what happened in Ankole, Rwanda, and Burundi. These are facts etched in African history with cultural and political consequences. We cannot deny them. We have to face them head on if we are to encourage social change that is essential for democratization of Africa. When bitter facts are exposed, some may hide behind innuendos and try to avoid the truth. The reality and the impact of Hima-Tutsi culture must be exposed and explained. Society cannot change if it avoids facing the truth, historical or contemporary. That is what makes Nelson Mandela a great African leader. Mandela exposed the truth about apartheid without being vindictive with the perpetrators of apartheid, a crime against humanity and international law. It is possible that many will distort what I am saying today in the hope that by tarnishing my name, they can avoid facing the historical truth and hide the reality of the arrogancy of Hima-Tutsi culture and how it has adversely shaped the personalities of contemporary African leaders who tend to be arrogant, of whom Yoweri Museveni and Paul Kagame of Rwanda are very good examples. They are dictators whose politics originates from the Hima-Tutsi culture arrogance. And there is no doubt about that in my mind. I'm trying to look at history in order to understand and explain what is going on today. I have no hatred of individual Bahima or Tutsis. In fact, the majority of them are very nice people, and I treasure the friendship I have had with some of them for many years. Among these are Kalu Kalumya, Therese Kamunamiri, ambassador in Washington, and Janet, who is mentioned by Janet Museveni in her book, My Life's Journey, Joshua Muvumba, and above all, the late Ibingira, Grace Stewart Ibingira, with whom I struggled to overthrow Idi Amin. I also went to school with many Bahima boys and girls who lived an innocent life far from the typical Hima Tutsi cultural stereotype. Such people bear no blame for the remnants of the corrosive Hima Tutsi culture as maliciously practiced by Yoweri Kaguta Museveni and Paul Kagame. When I point out the problems with our cultures, it does not mean that I am condemning the individual members who belong to that culture or social group, except when I explicitly say so, as I have done so here. Mandela attacked racism without reducing all white people to being racists. In fact, Mandela went further. He graciously forgave his tormentors and welcomed them in the fold of ANC liberators. Moreover, I'm also a bitter critic of Myron Chiganda culture, which regards humility as a virtue that should not be questioned by anybody, especially in relation to the preservation of monarchical political norms. The result has been that the Baganda are very poor performers when it comes to a democratic, aggressive political process. Consequently, the Baganda in general have fared badly in Ugandan politics, and their performance seems to be attributable to their cultural norms. The fact that I'm pointing out this cultural flaw of the Baganda does not mean that I hate or even despise the Baganda in general. In fact, I admire them, but I also understand their fatal political weaknesses. My primary purpose is to make the Baganda wake up and understand why their political performance is poor and unacceptable. The same is true when I point out the dangers of Hima Tutsi cultural arrogance. Now, if we may look at Museveni's political inconsistencies, which arise partly from his personality and partly from his Hima Tutsi culture. Museveni's political career is full of inconsistencies. How do we account for these inconsistencies, which are inseparable from Museveni's entire political career? A few examples will suffice. The most dramatic and obvious is the fact that Museveni justified the Bush war on the sole ground that the 1980 elections were rigged. Ironically, Museveni did not allege that he lost the election against the DP candidate Sam Kutesa in 1980 elections due to rigging of the elections in favor of his opponent. Nevertheless, Museveni swore that the 1980 elections, which would have been won by Democratic Party, justified his going to the bush to wage war in order to rectify what he considered a serious political aberration. This was nothing more than political posturing on the part of Museveni, as usual, playing tricks, using wrong examples to achieve his selfish political ends. Indeed, the civil war, supposedly to vindicate the rigging of the 1980 elections, commenced in February 1981. The most astounding fact, however, is not the fact that Museveni won the war. It is that after the war, all the elections held in 1996, 2001, 2006, and 2011 were rigged by Museveni's government. International observers have confirmed this fact. General Sejusa has also revealed Museveni's political secrets, corroborating the findings of the international electoral observers. Museveni has no credibility as a leader. Here we have more than political inconsistency. We have on display the worst form of hypocrisy, verging on psychopathy. How a national leader can publicly repudiate his public moral declarations without shame in a manner beyond is a matter beyond our evaluation of personality and character in politics. We have we shall leave that to history to render a more fair verdict. Another issue on which Museveni has been inconsistent is the issue of federalism. Museveni has opposed all efforts to establish federalism in Uganda. His preference is a system he can control and manipulate as his political, as any political dictator would, namely the so-called regional tier system. However, Museveni has been consistent in supporting federalism at the East African level. How do we explain this glaring inconsistency? The problem is Museveni aware that he is contradicting himself in a situation like this? Either Museveni does not believe in what he says, he lies openly in order to achieve his political objectives, regardless of what he thinks, and the people. He thinks that the people are too stupid to understand his inconsistency, and therefore he does not attach any moral value to his political actions and ambitions, in which case he acts maliciously with a single political objective, regardless of the consequences. Unfortunately, a criminal mind very often operates in a moral vacuum, consciously or unconsciously. Museveni's political behavior conforms to the latter category. Let me take a very short break, and I'll be back to continue our analysis of Museveni's political behavior.
Corona kali kawala kasiu alina omulenzi wako Tomu yawambika mwagala nnyo naye ng'akadyoga nnyo kalaba nga kayambo lw'endabika era bammerwa kyalumu kanyabo kange n'akagoba kafunye wa kilasi akasingako naye akugoba yakuwa ekkubo laba kalona gye kagenda kafunayo omusajja singooli akalaba nga malayika bakola babiri ne bezimba ebyamukama tebigwayo kati Tomu kamuyitako nga kamukuba nfuufu wetobera n'omukazi ng'olowooza kisabo wamuyamba buyambi tobera n'omukazi ng'osuubira tiwamujuna mutunye ebyo by'omutereka ng'olowooza kiyakoma awo bwalimya bulindi emikisa gy'abakazi tobindi ekyo olina okukimanya. Tomu mwazumbira asanga Karola n'omwagalwa wako yabura okwetuga n'abakira wakasimu nakuba Rona nze nkwewunya nali manyi nnyabo wafuna nnyo oyo falawo ekyazanga fere wa kibuga munange singanda ngompa time switi hati netwogera natamanya nti oli gwa switiza yali yakowa nnyo kamuddamu essimu yange gireke tomalirako muliro abatalina byokukola mwesimye mwagaba n'obudde mwamala gwenjagala ali bize nnyo tomuletako kamanyiro ulabanga mistikolo ebyange nawe sori byagwawo n'omukazi ng'olowooza kisabo wamuyamba buyambi tobeera n'omukazi ng'osuubira tiwamujuna butunyi ebyo by'omutereka ng'olowooza kiyakoma awo walimya bulindi emikisa gy'abakazi gy'obindi ekyo olina okukimanya tobeera n'omukazi ng'olowooza kisabo wamuyamba buyambi tobeera n'omukazi ng'osuubira tiwamujuna butunyi ebyo by'omutereka ng'olowooza kiyakoma awo walimya bulindi emikisa gy'abakazi gy'obindi ekyo olina okukimanya.
After a short break, I am back to continue with our analysis of Museveni's political behavior. I think it is important that we understand this political behavior and, of course, its motivation or origin before we can really effectively deal with the situation. The third area of inconsistency has to do with corruption, the rule of law, and the management of the economy articulated in the 10-point program, which was brought supposedly from the bush and implemented after 1986. Museveni, we are told, waged a war between 1981 and 1986 in order to eradicate corruption, restore the rule of law, and manage the economy to the benefit of every Ugandan. It turns out that Museveni is the most corrupt leader Uganda has ever known. Museveni has his family and close friends have allegedly acquired so much wealth during the last quarter of a century that they are estimated to own a quarter of the country's gross domestic product. The sad fact is that they are not ashamed of this fact, clearly displaying their moral bankruptcy and political delinquency. The 10-point program also promised in unequivocal terms the restoration of the rule of law. First, we must point out that every corrupt transaction is a violation of rule of law. Therefore, being corrupt is sufficient for us to declare that without doing anything more, the Museveni regime violates the rule of law through its corrupt deals. Nevertheless, they go much further than that. Museveni has gone very far in violating the rule of law. Museveni is directly involved in assassination of his political rivals. While the NRM regime ratified the UN Convention Against Torture and domesticated the convention, thereby making the convention a part of the laws of Uganda, the Internal Security Organization, the External Security Organization, the Chieftains of Military Intelligence, the UPDF, and the Uganda Police Force are directly involved in torturing people, murdering political rivals, and eliminating potential political rivals at a rate far exceeding that we witnessed under Idi Amin and the Apollo Milton Obote regimes. Museveni himself, in fact, has the personality of an incorrigible psychopath. He was involved in the murder of innocent people in a Ruweo Triangle that shifted the blame directly onto Obote regime. He secretly executed some of the commanders he did not trust, like Captain Guedeko. Museveni is also responsible for committing war crimes in Ruweo Triangle, in the east of Uganda and in the north of Uganda. All this has taken place in spite of the fact that Uganda has ratified the Rome Statute. Museveni, therefore, has not restored the rule of law according to the 10-point program. He is incapable of doing so. He has, in fact, aggravated the violation of the rule of law, whereby justifying his being overthrown by force if he does not voluntarily step down is justifiable. However, we know that Museveni is incapable of committing political suicide. Management of the economy has not fared any better under Yoweri Museveni, supposedly a student of political economy. Unemployment has never been worse in Uganda since independence. The infrastructure has never been worse in Uganda since the mid-1960s. Insecurity has never been worse in Uganda since Idi Amin's reign of terror, the value of the shilling has never been lower in the history of the country, and so on, and so on. We can cite more and more statistics. In short, there is no single reason to support the NRM regime as compared to all its predecessors. This brief analysis brings us to the most fundamental question. Why do incompetent dictators struggle so viciously to keep political power? What explains their motivation or even accounts for their temporary success at deception, as Museveni has shrewdly managed to do throughout his tenure? The first hint is that dictatorship is an addictive disease. A dictator will do anything, anytime, in order to continue enjoying the sweetness of power. No crime is too atrocious for a dictator to commit if his power is threatened. Indeed, through political delusion, dictators relying on their brutal intelligence agencies genuinely believe that the people love them. Dictators, like addicts, are incapable of understanding the limits of their human capacity until it is too late. And this has been the history of dictatorship. All dictators are thirsty for political glory and longevity in power. Dictators believe that the longer they stay in power, the more famous they will be viewed by history. This fact, the fact is that greatness of a leader does not depend on how long they rule or they lead the country. With that test in mind, of the duration of a leadership being the measure of greatness, Ronald Reagan would be far more famous than John Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln. Kennedy was in power for only 3 years. Lincoln was killed just after being re-elected for a second term. These are American icons. Indeed, if longevity in power was a measure of greatness, the greatest leader in the world would include Muammar Gaddafi, Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, Saddam Hussein, and not to leave out of this, Mobutu Sese Seko was a banger. If Museveni thinks that he will become great by virtue of the duration of his leadership, he is totally mistaken. History has proved it, and we know what the facts are. So, the inconsistencies inherent in Museveni's political behavior can also be traced in his ideological inconsistency. Now, let us look briefly at the factual gaps and inconsistencies in Museveni's autobiography. We conclude with a closer look at the factual gaps, the contradictions, and the inconsistencies we have discovered in Museveni's story and the inner so-called political philosophy, in the hope that they can be rationally explained. We believe that these elements of factual gaps, inconsistencies, and contradictions in the story of Museveni's politics directly relate to the personality of Museveni and make it difficult for an informed reader to swallow Museveni's story wholesale without reservations. The story he tells in the sowing of the mustard seed. The factual gaps in the story are important because they tell us a lot about the character of the author. Let us look at a few examples. And in fact, they show you, they tell us why Museveni cannot never be trusted. It's part of his personality to tell lies. One of the factual gaps in Museveni's own story relates to Museveni's relationship with the DP, Democratic Party of Uganda. This relationship may appear to be irrelevant or remotely related to the historical explanation and Museveni's political behavior, but in fact it is. Museveni gives two inconsistent accounts regarding his relationship with the Democratic Party. First, Museveni wrote that he was a sympathizer of DP because his parents were members of DP by virtue of sectarianism. That line of reasoning may sound convincing to some, but in fact, it is not true. It contains an element of sectarianism, which makes the relationship appear abnormal. Just before UPM was formed, Museveni wrote that he rejected the idea of joining DP. The idea of rejoining DP, he argued, meant that Museveni would have been a full member of DP and therefore more than a sympathizer of DP. Now, if you are rejoining a political party, it means that you were a member before. But he, in his own word, he says earlier that he was just a sympathizer of DP. The two are different. Being a sympathizer and rejoining DP, refusing to rejoin DP means that he had been a member. So these are two inconsistent statements. In fact, being a youth winger of DP, as Museveni claims, should mean that Museveni was a full member of DP. We must therefore determine which of the three possibilities is true. Was Museveni a sympathizer, a member, or not a member at all of the Democratic Party of Uganda? The truth is that the statement about Museveni's relationship with the DP are meant to mislead about his political past. Museveni is playing tricks as usual, and of course inevitably being inconsistent. Museveni is giving the impression that for a decade, that is between 1960 and 1970, he was a member of DP. But his claim lacks credibility. He wants to avoid or even hide any close or intimate relationship with the UPC in the past. In 1964, Museveni clearly states that his group was sympathetic to the Kakonge socialist wing within UPC. In fact, all his friends in his group belonged to UPC. These included Elia Kategaya, Ruhakana Rugunda, and Perez Kamunanwire. Kamunanwire has always been proud of having been a UPC youth winger. Why would Museveni belong to DP while all his closest friends belonged to UPC, especially given the fact that all the members of the group had a very similar way of thinking about politics and ideology at the time? Clearly, ideologically, DP was very different from UPC in the 1960s, and Museveni cannot confuse us about that. Moreover, if Museveni had been recruited to work for the General Service Unit, which was established in 1964, probabilities are that Museveni was a member of UPC, in which case his alleged relationship with the DP, if it existed, was either fraudulent or strategically used to spy on DP politicians. This fact may be one reason Museveni wants to disassociate himself from UPC. Therefore, Museveni's claim that he was either a sympathizer or a member of DP has no credibility. It is meant to cover up his political past. Incredibly, Museveni does not mention anybody else among his friends who, like him, were youth wingers with him in DP. There isn't a single one he mentioned. Let Museveni, for example, name at least one. He couldn't have been a youth winger by himself in DP. He must have been a youth winger with others. So who are they? Let him tell us. Museveni could not have been the only youth winger who belonged to DP. The gap is therefore factual gap is a deliberate omission in an attempt to deceive the public. Between 1966 and 1967, Obote started his political crusade known as the Move to the Left. It was 1966 when Museveni ceased to be a Mulokole or born-again Christian because he became a socialist believer, and for that very reason made a collective decision with his group, the people I've mentioned, to apply to Dar es Salaam University, where his main attraction by his own admission, was the socialist or progressive leader Julius Kambarage Nyerere. But Museveni claims that he continued to be a member of DP until 1970. That sounds incredible, to me at least. When Obote published the Common Man's Charter, which was the equivalent of Nyerere's Arusha Declaration, Museveni and many other socialists in Uganda campaigned for it. These facts point to the conclusion that in his story, Museveni is not honest. We must read his book, Sowing the Mustard Seed, with caution and suspicion. Museveni is not honest. There is evidence that Museveni and all the members of his group belong to UPC and not to DP. There is sufficient circumstantial evidence to prove that Museveni was in fact a member of UPC. Now let us look at membership of a general service unit. Another factual gap in the story of Museveni's autobiography, or you can even say espionage activities in the GSU, is that of the what he tells us about the service unit. Obviously, we'd not expect Museveni to confess about his spying activities in the general service unit. The fact is that Museveni was an officer in the general service unit during Obote's time and Akena Adoko's leadership of the GSU. Museveni's personality fits very well into that of a spy profile. Museveni's blind ambition for power, his vindictiveness, and his lack of trust of others all spell out a spy's personality. We should remember that Museveni tremendously enjoys impressing others, another common trait of a good spy. We believe that the reason Museveni had a close relationship with the notorious dictators, Nyerere, Gaddafi, and Castro, was the fact that he wanted to impress them as one of them, not fully comprehending at the time the adverse consequences of his acts in the future. Usually, liars have a very short memory. For example, Museveni was very close to Julius Nyerere. Even his very youthful age, as compared to Nyerere, such a relationship could only thrive if Museveni convinced Nyerere through psychological tricks that he was an authentic socialist, a true comrade. But as we have seen, Museveni turned capitalist after 1988 when he was in power, and due to circumstances probably beyond his control. But he never denounced the oppressive socialist regime headed by Nyerere in the past. In fact, he could not, as a matter of fact, do that because he had already impressed Nyerere that he was a staunch socialist. The fact that Nyerere wrote a foreword to Museveni's book published in 2000, the book is known as What is Wrong with What is Africa's Problem, published in 2000, the year 2000. Now, this is very important because it forced Museveni to live a double life. This fact of Nyerere being close to Museveni and writing a foreword to his book, it forced him to live a double life. Why am I saying this? With Nyerere, Museveni continued to be an authentic socialist. With the World Bank and IMF, Museveni was a stalwart, progressive, young capitalist. That double image conforms very well with the personality of a spy whose existence thrives well in the shadows of the dark political corridors where masks are the face of the spy trade. So you can see that we are trying to unravel the personality of Museveni in order to understand his political behavior. Until you understand his personality, you will not understand his political behavior. This is true not only for Museveni, but also for many others. Now, let us look at the mysterious deaths and how Museveni handles that situation. There are factual gaps of a mysterious kind, some of which emanate from the wars Museveni fought. Guedeko, as we mentioned, was a close Lule confidant. He was the second in command of NRA in 1983. He died in mysterious circumstances described as friendly fire. His family has refused to accept a bribe of a posthumous Kagera award given to NRM so-called heroes. Museveni cannot even reveal exactly where Guedeko's body was buried so that his family can retrieve the body and give it a decent cultural burial. Why? Chances are that Guedeko was shot in the head from behind. That is, he was technically executed. But why? That is the factual gap Museveni will not fill within without incriminating himself in committing war crimes in Ruwero Triangle. There are many other factual gaps, as a matter of fact, in Museveni's story, which the reader of the book, Sowing the Mustard Seed, will find. Kaira's death remains a mystery. Museveni, in a blatantly corrupt manner, went as far as buying a house for Kaira's widow, Betty, in Poughkeepsie, New York. The taxpayers' money was used, and probably there was no official record for it. The embassy in Washington, headed by Ambassador Elizabeth Bagaya, at that time, was involved in the purchasing of the house for Betty Kaira. If Museveni was so concerned about the welfare of Kaira's widow and his children, why was he not released? Why hasn't he released the official report detailing the findings of the Scotland Yard and the NRM and the Uganda police investigators? Another mysterious death is that of Rait Omongin. At a meeting in Nairobi in 1975, attended by Museveni and Yoga Adola, the issue of the death of Rait Omongin came up. Museveni tried to deny involvement in Omongin's death, but the issue was left open-ended and has never been resolved. It remains a big factual gap in Museveni's narrative. We mention a few of these mysterious factual gaps for purposes of illustration and explanation. Museveni's story cannot be complete as long as these factual gaps continue to gape at us. Many questions remain unanswered. Museveni is the only person with the accurate information to fill these factual gaps by telling the truth. But even more important, there is a good reason why those who know Museveni well fear him tremendously, in the same way Amin and Obote were feared by their opponents. By the way, Obote feared Museveni more than anybody else. In an interview by a Monitor reporter in Zambia, the reporter asked Obote, "Why don't you go home?" He laughed at him and said, "Museveni will kill me." So that means that even Obote feared death, although he himself inflicted death on others. Personality in politics is always destiny because it is inevitably intertwined in the character and behavior of the individual actor. I'll pause here for a few minutes and I'll be back to conclude this story about the interaction between personality and political behavior. Thank you very much. Ekitonde kikazi kyasuka Katonda yatuwa feva yatukola mu katiba kanjawulo bw'olaba ng'eyafedinga omulala mulaba ng'amatabuta emikisa gy'abakazi gyo mingi ky'omulina okukiyiga eyandobera mu sapatu omusanga yasaze kakondo emikisa gy'ayayiga ekyo olina okukimanya kanyabo ke wasibiranga mu nju okasanga ku piki getaya emikisa gy'abakazi gyo mingi ekyo olina okukimanya laba yasibiranga mukene onyabo kati ennyama girisamwa emikisa
You are listening to Voice of Uganda Radio, the mouthpiece of all Ugandans, wherever they may be, to voice their problems without fear of any retribution. The Voice of Uganda Radio works in sync with FADU, the Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda. FADU is an organization that was formed to work as a platform for all Ugandans at home and outside, to work synergistically to liberate our mother Uganda from the ruthless invaders that have sucked it dry. Therefore, FADU invites all able Ugandans to act now and save the Ugandan humanity that is being slaughtered, destroyed, and robbed by a few people unworthy to call themselves Ugandans. Many people are crying for action in Uganda as they languish in misery. FADU echoes their cries by making the loudest alarm to everyone to join FADU, not tomorrow or the next day, but today. The number to join is 408-904-7038. The email is info@fadu.org.
We call upon people from the north and south, from the east and west, and yes, from the central province of Uganda to be loyal to one another. We must preserve our loyalty to human dignity. We call upon people once again not to wait until it is too late to begin thinking about a free Uganda. We call for a new attitude. Arise, fellow citizens, arise. Let us fight for a free Uganda. Museveni must go.
Radio eno ekolaganira wamu n'ekibiina ekya Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda, FADU. Ebigendererwa by'ekibiina kino kuzza mirembe, enkolagana ey'awamu, obwenkanya, okuggyawo enkola y'omwana waani, n'okusosola mu mawanga, okutulugunya, okulya enguzi, ebikudde ejjembe mu Uganda. Era kirwanirira okuzza enfuga eya demokrasiya mu Uganda. Ekibiina kino kye kisookedde ddala okukubiriza buli muntu yenna okukyegattako awatali kusosola mu mawanga n'enzikiriza oba ekitundu omuntu kyalimu mu nsi yonna. Kino kye kiseera twegatte tusobole okuzza obupya ensi yaffe Uganda edobonkanyizibwa. Buli eyandyagadde okwegatta ku kibiina kya FADU kuba ennamba eno 1-8-9-4-7-3-8 oba weeyambise email info@fadu.org.
After a short break, now for the echoes. After a short break, I'm back to continue the story of the personality and the political behavior of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. So some of you who did not believe or even understand that there is a connection between behavior and personality, you can pay attention to what we are saying now. Now, we've seen about the factual inconsistencies in Museveni's story, which tended to reveal that he has never been honesty and told the truth. Now, there are also some philosophical inconsistencies. Museveni's story is also full of philosophical inconsistencies. For example, 1988, Museveni enacted the so-called sectarian law by amending the penal code in order to punish those who allegedly promoted sectarianism. More specifically, Section 41E of the Uganda Penal Code prohibited promotion of, quote, feelings of ill will and hostility, religious animosity, or communal ill feeling among anybody or group of persons. That, left on its face, may sound like a reasonable enactment, but actually it was a politically and shrewdly manipulated legislation which was used just to go after political enemies. I remember even a man like Omar Atubo, whom I know very well. He was my classmate. He was arrested and charged with treason. And later on, of course, the charges were dropped, and Omar Atubo ended up in Museveni's cabinet, although he was recently dropped. Again, showing you, better not trust this character. But anyway, this section, the amendment, the so-called sectarian, first of all, we proved last week that the theory on which Museveni based his explanation of sectarianism was invalid, and if it was invalid, then why would a law to enforce it make any sense if the theory is invalid? So it was really put there for. In fact, the person who has violated this section more than anybody else is Museveni himself. He has committed a lot of sectarian crimes more than anybody else. So the real purpose of the sectarian law was to silence Museveni's political opponents and critics in the press. Later, the whole media was affected after electronic communication or broadcasting was introduced. Any sharp critique of the president, a government, or their policies could trigger the law by alleging that they were promoting, quote, feelings of ill will and hostility or communal ill feeling against any person or the president. Now, why am I saying that Museveni has committed the violation of this law and has not even been charged? When he goes around in Bunyara and Savanyara and promoting all these sub-kingdoms in Uganda, he's promoting feelings of ill will and hostility to the Kabaka. That clearly is covered by this section 41 of the Penal Code. So, but of course, nobody would dare charge Museveni at the present. We will charge him later on, but not at this moment. As we have shown in our argument, Museveni himself, is violating the law, by promoting sectarianism, especially in the recent Bafurik in Bunyoro, which took place in 2007. Museveni wrote a letter to Wabdeya, Beatrice Wabdeya, promoting, Certainly, he was promoting ill will and hostility of the communal ill feeling among the Bafuriki and the Banyoro. Museveni, of course, thinks that he's above the law. His attitudes and behavior seem to convey the message of a leader who is not concerned with conforming with the principles of the rule of law, as we have already pointed out. He is the chief violator of the principle of rule of law. The enactment of the sectarian law also portrays Museveni's philosophical inconsistency in another way. Museveni is a furious condemner of colonialism and colonial laws. And yet, Museveni, by enacting the sectarian law and incorporating it in the law of sedition, which was one of the colonial relics Museveni is fond of reciting when it suits him. By enacting the sectarian law, Museveni was behaving exactly like, if not worse than, the oppressive colonialists. He vehemently condemns in his book, Sowing the Master's Seed. In fact, all of the post-independence leaders of Uganda, of all of them, Museveni used the law of sedition most to suppress his political opponents and to persecute the journalists who criticized him or his NRM regime. Only Idi Amin did not resort to the law of sedition to silence his critics. He simply eliminated his critics. The Supreme Court struck down the law of sedition, thereby uprooting and destroying the oppressive colonial relic of the law of sedition. However, the Constitutional Court, in what I may call a Musevenica legal reasoning, did not nullify the sectarian law, even though the law of sedition and sectarianism were juridical identical twins. We have shown, hopefully convincingly, that Museveni's theory of social metamorphosis, on which sectarianism was originally rationalized, is invalid. It remains to be seen how future courts will interpret the sectarian law in view of Museveni's invalid social theory. By suppressing political freedom, either by strictly enforcing the sedition law or prohibiting the free operation of political parties, Museveni, like the colonialists he condemns, contributed to the retardation of the process of democratization in exactly the same way as the colonialists did, who preferred to maintain the status quo by suppressing political freedom and imprisoning the so-called agitators who opposed the colonial regimes across Africa. These, of course, included the Asajefo Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, the Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and many others. Nelson Mandela was also charged with similar laws, but under apartheid, which had a different political context. Other inconsistencies in Museveni's story that the human rights are not divinely ordained, and therefore they can be arbitrarily suppressed under some circumstances which are subjectively determined by the regime in power, which at the same time Museveni wrote, he wrote an article in 1981 in the Uganda Resistance News. Does it sound familiar? For those who keep historical records may remember this news, the Uganda Resistance News, arguing Museveni in this Resistance News, the very first edition. Museveni argued that people have a right to rebel if their inalienable human rights are violated by a tyrannical regime. Can you believe it? Museveni wrote 1981 that in the Uganda Resistance News, a publication of NRM from the bush, that people have an inalienable human right to rebel against tyrannical regimes, which means we Ugandans have a right declared by Museveni himself to rebel against him. That article was deliberately omitted from a book consisting of speeches and papers Museveni published earlier. The book I'm referring to is the one for which a foreword was written by Nyerere. He didn't put that article in there. Why? This was a deliberate omission. Again, it tells you that Museveni's personality is trying to hide something. He couldn't put that article there because it contradicted everything he was saying at the time. After he came to power and became a dictator. This omission is sufficient evidence, as far as I'm concerned, of proving that Museveni is neither honest nor credible when he talks about human rights. Museveni has distinguished himself as an enemy of the human rights by shooting pregnant women and infants who are innocent and prohibiting people to associate and freely assemble by enforcing this so-called public order management law. So what else can we say about inconsistency, this time philosophical? On top of the Museveni is expected to have endorsed Article 20 of the 1995 Constitution, which provides that human rights are inherent and not granted by the state. Museveni has also advocated a view that the Constitution should be amended in order to abolish the right to bail for people charged with treason and corruption. Guess what? Museveni cannot even imagine that one day he may sit in a cell charged with treason and corruption, and therefore would want bail to be available to him. He has that either incapacity to understand or empathize or to stand out of his own personality and see reality. Museveni's views on the rights to bail expose both his arrogance and ignorance. They indicate that Museveni does not believe in the protection of rights to bail, which is guaranteed by the 1995 Constitution. One of these rights is the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. For Museveni, political expediency is the best policy. Principles do not matter. You can change the Constitution anytime it suits your political whims. That attitude is inconsistent with the enforcement of the rule of law and the protection of human rights, or even the existence of a Bill of Rights, which is beyond political reproach. Now, if I may bore you a little bit more about theoretical inconsistencies from Museveni. The other contradictions and inconsistencies stem from Museveni's abortive attempt to write a social theory, which we talked about last week. Museveni's theory of social metamorphosis is an attempt to explain the causes of sectarianism by linking the causation of sectarianism to class configuration in Africa. Three unrelated social elements are linked in a chain of social causation. According to the theory, sectarianism is caused by the absence of a certain class structure, the middle class in Africa, and Uganda is a typical example for Museveni. Of course, all that is bullshit, bunk. And yet Museveni enacted the sectarian law in order to punish those who behave in a sectarian way, even though in his theory Museveni postulated that the cause of sectarianism is absence of the middle class. Now, why do you punish people if, in fact, sectarianism is not caused by human conscious behavior, but by class conflict? Therefore, punishing people for committing sectarian acts does not make any sense in criminology if the real causes of sectarianism are rooted in the existence of a specific class configuration beyond the capacity of an individual to control. That type of reasoning is both contradiction and inconsistent. It is actually also meaningless. Second, Museveni blames colonialism for causing the conditions that presently give rise to sectarianism in Africa. He also blames the feudalists for failing to repel colonialism. And apparently, they are inherently and indirectly responsible for causing sectarianism. These three explanations of the causation of sectarianism do not make any empirical sense. Moreover, the three types of sectarianism, societal, political, and military, have different causes, and therefore they cannot be attributed to a single cause of the existence of quote-unquote class configuration. While Museveni argued in 1986 that political parties should not be allowed to operate because the necessary class configuration to support their heresy operation did not exist in Uganda, and at the same time he marched from the bush to State House. In 2005, Museveni amended the constitution in order to allow multi-parties to exist without any regard to as to whether the sociological conditions, that is, class configuration or objective conditions that existed in the country in 1986 had substantially changed in 2005 in order to allow a healthy existence of multi-parties. So political expediency prevailed over principle, again in order to satiate political greed, and deceptively, of course. Therefore, Museveni's causal linkage between sectarianism and the political parties was a political argument and not a scientific explanation. The theory, being invalid, collapsed before it could be effectively applied. Unfortunately, the invalid theory crippled the 1995 Constitution purposely in order for Museveni to attain his political objectives. Apparently, Museveni cannot clearly distinguish between social theory, which is supposed to be scientific, and ideology, which is, of course, politics. Hence, there are inevitable contradictions and inconsistencies inherently embedded in the logical structure of Museveni's political narrative. There is no way to salvage Museveni's narrative, political narrative, without rewriting it, both to plug the factual gaps that exist in it and to eliminate the invalid social theories, of which, of course, Museveni is incapable intellectually to either accurately formulate or even, to tell you the truth, comprehend. Because he, on the one hand, he was blaming the feudalists for failing to fight off colonialism, but at the same time he's trying to say, well, the only reason why we have sectarianism is because of the class configuration. The arguments don't. And when Museveni goes into Bururi, Savaruri, and Savanyara, and Savakochi, trying to stir up controversy and confusion, I don't think he is less of an evil devil, sectarian Lucifer, causing trouble. Museveni's social metamorphosis theory has a close kinship, as we indicated, to Karl Marx's capital theory. But that's where the comparison ends. Karl Marx was an intellectual. In fact, he was an intellectual giant. Much as his theory may be invalid today, he comprehended what he was writing. If you read his 3 volumes of Das Kapital and the introduction to a critique of political economy, and also together they wrote with Friedrich Engels, the German ideology. If you read those, you know that Karl Marx, Museveni, comes nowhere near to Karl Marx's intellectual capacity. We therefore conclude that Museveni's social metamorphosis theory is equally invalid, not only because its parent theory is invalid, but mainly because its premises do not contain sufficient empirical data to verify them. For example, the linkage between classes and sectarianism is postulated and not empirically proved. The theory is, in fact, as we have already pointed out, pure politics and not science. The theory of social metamorphosis was designed to impress people in the process, capture the political power. That was the main objective for Museveni. It was not really to explain any social phenomena scientifically. In fact, the theory was first published in Museveni's campaign manifesto in 1996, therefore linking it to politics, more to politics than to an intellectual purpose. The theory was not formulated to explain the causation of political conflict by political parties and sectarians, but to win an election. Museveni's ideology, these findings we've made bring us closer to and lead directly to the mystery of Museveni's ideology. Museveni, as a political youth in Dar es Salaam University, was a radical socialist communist. It is clear that the theory of social metamorphosis was based more on Museveni's belief in a communist ideology than on anything else. Theory is concrete evidence that once upon a time Museveni was a communist. Otherwise, he would not have believed in it. Museveni's theory, if he still believes in its validity, gives us the clear link between Museveni and socialist communist ideology. The question to ask is, what ideology did Museveni believe in? What does it believe in today? Although Museveni openly denounced his being a born-again Christian in 1966, the same year he became a radical socialist communist by an apparent coincidence. He was never publicly denounced socialist or communism. If Museveni's theory links him to and partly explains his ideology, which we believe in this case, he cannot credibly claim to believe in capitalism, while at the same time believing in the validity of a social theory that is derived directly from Marxist ideological premises. This is a fundamental contradiction which only Museveni can resolve before he becomes both intellectually and ideologically clean. Any credibility in what Museveni says or does depends on that. So this argument directly links Museveni's personality to the ideological ambiguity that gives him cover to hide his true philosophical identity. All the contradictions and inconsistencies exposed here lead to one logical conclusion. Museveni's ideological and philosophical ambiguities are inevitable. They bring Museveni's personality, fantasies, political ambitions, and political behavior to a single focal point. For some reasons not explained in sowing the mustard seed, Museveni has very close ties with the radical socialists like Fidel Castro, Julius Nyerere, and Muammar Gaddafi, whose company he seems incapable of abandoning because of his character. Museveni has never abandoned his friendship to these personalities. Museveni seems to be too incapable of changing his personality within the existing ideological framework. Museveni cannot stand firmly on principle because he has none. Personality and politics have totally fused in Museveni's character. As they say, birds of the same color flock together. Museveni's friendship with Nyerere lasted until the latter died. The difference between Museveni and Nyerere, however, is that Nyerere was open and honest about his socialist ideology. When his policies failed to bear fruit, Nyerere admitted his mistakes publicly and voluntarily retired from the politics after 20 years in power without any question. Museveni has neither admitted failure of his policies, especially the war on corruption, the invalidity of his concocted theories, the causal link between class structure and the sectarianism, nor even any wisdom in retiring from politics. After all, his cumulative failures have piled up to his neck. In fact, in 2005, Museveni, in a political act he will regret on his dying day, amended the constitution in order to remove term limits so that he would run for the third term after 20 years in office. Museveni, lacking any rudiments of foresight, preferred to compound his mistakes and failures by making himself a political hostage of his blind ambitions. He is unlikely to have a respectable legacy of any kind. From now on, it is a downhill into the dark dungeons of history, housing the souls of dictators and political failures. In such dungeons, Museveni is likely to find company from the cruel ghosts of Idi Amin and Milton Obote. Neither of these three men will ever have a street in Uganda named after them. Ironically, they hang on to power tenaciously, dreaming to translate their duration in office into greatness, not only in Uganda but in Africa as a whole. That, unfortunately, is the appropriate verdict and reward of history for any dictator. When Museveni switched from socialism to capitalism, he did not explicitly announce his conversion to capitalism. As we pointed out, he had good reasons not to. In fact, in July 2011, Kintu Nyago, Museveni's deputy principal secretary then, categorically asserted, contrary to evidence available, that, quote, Museveni has never been a Marxist, unquote. Consequently, Museveni has kept the people guessing as to what his real ideology is. Well, what do we learn from his company? The Museveni, the Gaddafi, and the Castro. This is in sharp contrast to the bearded, shrewd Fidel Castro, who is a straightforward, proud, cigar-smoking communist. Unlike Museveni, who is clean-shaven and bald-headed, Castro has been religiously open about his communist ideology and has always openly declared that he believes in it. Not even poverty and corruption have driven Castro into secret collaboration with capitalism. Museveni is the opposite. Castro is likely to leave behind a proud, though checkered legacy. Museveni cannot. Probably the personality Museveni resembles most is that of Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi preached socialism while he enjoyed the sweet fruits of capitalism, brought in by extensive oil wealth of Libya, which he exploited corruptly and extravagantly to achieve his personal, political, and economic goals. Gaddafi was also a very brutal man, whose brutality was clearly written on his deadly, devilishly wrinkled face. Like Gaddafi, Museveni is presiding over the reign of terror in Uganda. He is relentlessly hunting down his critics like the speaker recently mutilated the body of Colonel Muzora with the eyes plucked out was delivered to his family in Ankole by NRM security services. To his bereaved family, in order to strike terror in the hearts of his opponents. And such a man maintain the rule of law? Museveni and NRM regime, devoid of shame, is charging the opposition leaders with the heinous crimes of treason, concealment of treason, and the murder of Muzora. The devils, however, know the truth, but they are oblivious to the laws of history and science, which unequivocally stipulate that facts are indestructible, and therefore truth exists throughout eternity, regardless of a dictator's wish. I may not know who killed Kaira or Guedeko, but the truth of who did it cannot be destroyed. Gaddafi is known to have committed similar atrocities against his enemies and political opponents. Indeed, Gaddafi authorized the blowing up of a Pan Am plane full of innocent victims, all of whom perished in Scotland. Gaddafi declared himself ruler for life and advised his friend Museveni not to waste time running for elections, since he was a revolutionary, and revolutionaries don't compete in elections. Museveni seems to be pursuing a similar but increasingly elusive objective. Like Gaddafi, Museveni trusts no one. Museveni is a man for whom suspicion is an ever-present reality. That is why both Museveni and Gaddafi have their sons and their family members, their closest aides and advisors, clear signs of lack of confidence and trust on the part of the two dictators. By comparison, Museveni with his closest friends will finally crack the mysterious political riddle. Personality is inseparable from political behavior, and the quality of leadership depends on the personality of the leader. Read, for example, Museveni's sowing of the mustard seed carefully. The truth is not always obvious in that book. The reader must always read between the lines, as they say. Many gaps and ambiguities lie hidden in the apparently innocuous narrative, the concocted theories, the unknown ideology, the ambiguous philosophy, and the course of verbal and adjectival crevices such as reactionary and revolutionary. In these ambiguities and factual gaps are buried Museveni's political secrets. Are the factual gaps the result of ideological ambiguity, the absence of a coherent political philosophy based on principles, or the result of a deliberate attempt by a habitual liar to mislead the reader of the sowing of the mustard seed? You have to read the book yourself in order to answer these questions satisfactorily for yourself. Here, we have provided all the hints you may need to navigate your trip into the mind of a dictator. So our time has passed, and we end our conversation on that note. Next week, please tune in and see what we bring you next. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we will meet again on the air.